Hi, folks, and welcome back to MMA Talking Heads. I'm your co-host, Jason Probst, along with co-host Ian Parker, owner of CageHero.net. Ian, how you doing today?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I figured on this episode we'd reflect on a few different topics, touch on episode 2 of The Ultimate Fighter Live, which is this Friday, and then jump into some of the recent newsworthy developments in UFC, particularly with matchmaking. I want to talk on last Friday's Ultimate Fighter Live, though. Obviously, you know, the first fight under the new format where it's live and they kind of tape the weak stuff had Darren Cruikshank against James Vick, and what was a pretty good fight. And I think a lot of people going into this, I'm always excited when there's a good fight, especially to kick off the show, you know, in the week to week. And I don't think a lot of people, I didn't give Vick a chance in this one, comes up big with a knee to the head that ends it. What were your thoughts on the new format and the first fight to kick off the series?
The new format, I don't even know if it should be called new format. The only thing that I think it does bring something of a cool factor is that it's live and no one feels kind of cheated that other people out there know the actual results.
Right.
I know the last few seasons everyone's like, oh, I wonder who's in the finals, and some people somehow knew.
Right.
Sometimes it got leaked. Now it's pretty cool that no one has any idea. These fights are live. We're getting to actually grow with these fighters and really see how they're going from week to week. And actually, it's on the real time of week to week. Within the fight, it's these guys are all selected for a reason. Am I the biggest fan of how they got into the house with a one-round fight? I'm really not. I think the one round's a little weird. I think it has to be 2 rounds. A lot of guys start off fighting slow and usually sometimes, really catch their wind and really start getting into their groove in the second and third round. So a one-round thing, some guys might have been cheated unless they got finished in the first round. But that fight was pretty exciting. I mean, look, to start off the season, the actual not getting into the house, but the real round one with a knockout from a guy who's only 4-0 to a guy who has a little bit more experience, who, to see the underdog win is always fun, I wasn't really rooting for either guy, rooting for a cool fight. And you know what? The action spoke for itself, and nothing like a nice flying knee to the jaw to put someone to sleep.
It really was, and it was a good reminder. I've always kind of felt for those guys that were probably good enough to get into the house but got a tough matchup. And I thought Drew Dober, the guy that fought Cruikshank the week before, he was probably better than a lot of guys that made it onto the house. And I was pretty high on Cruikshank. And, we'd seen Vick. He looked a little bit raw, a little bit unpolished, kind of, 6'3", pretty tall for a lightweight. And I thought he was going to get smashed. And it was just a great reminder that, every fight is a new day. And
that's also the beauty in the matchups. Sometimes it comes down to the coaching. I still think in the first rounds, I think Uriah and Dominic are going to think they know what they're doing with all the matchups, and most of the time, their experience, I'm sure they know that. I'm sure they will. But I think even them, they're starting to really learn who these fighters are, and really not even so much their fighters, but the opponents as well. So I think as you get into the second and then the quarters, semis, finals, etc., these guys will really get a better idea of who to match up with who. I'm surprised. Even though Vick was only 4-0, I'm surprised they put such a short guy against him.
Yeah.
Even if you're a 4-0 pro, you should know to use your advantage, use your reach. And granted, his win had nothing to do with that whatsoever. Again, fun fight, and looking forward to whatever they got next.
Now, did you catch a little bit element of gamesmanship though? Because Faber could either pick the first fight or the first guy, and he picked the first fight. Having the proverbial hammer, to choose the fights, loses, and then it was a very kind of an interesting moment of gamesmanship when after the fight, they're like, okay, pick the next fight, and we're doing it on live TV, and Dominic Cruz takes his #1 pick and says, all right, Faber, pick the guy to fight him. Was that a little bit of gamesmanship on part of Cruz? I thought that was very interesting.
I think that was Cruz showing Cruz's character, the cocky, confident side, however you want to call it. I think Dominic was trying to show that, what, throw whoever you got, any one of my guys. My team is better than yours.
Right.
And granted, it's a #1 pick. You know what? As you saw last night, that might not mean anything.
Right. And I always
really might not. And with all these guys, I mean, I'm pretty close with a few of them. I know some of the guys out there, and some of these guys are probably the best fighters you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And I don't even think Dominic and Uriah have heard of some of these. And again, it's going to be more of a learning curve even for them when it comes to the matchups.
No, and it's one thing I always try to remember is that Luke Kumo, I think he was the last guy picked, and he got to the finals of one of the first couple seasons of Ultimate Fighter and gave Joe Stevenson a heck of a tussle. So really, if it doesn't really matter where you're picked, it's how much you progress and the kind of work you put in during the show. So a good start off for
Absolutely.
Ultimate Fighter 15. Wanted to move on to a couple other things. Some matches have been made in the past week or so that both you and I are pretty happy on. They have solidified after going back and forth for the next lightweight title shot. Ben Henderson will be giving Frankie Edgar a rematch. What are your thoughts on this, and did this make sense for the UFC? Because there was a lot of talk about Henderson in a rematch with Anthony Pettis, but that's on hold for now.
You know, I might be one of the only people in the world who's going to say this. I'm really not a fan of the rematch. You know,
Really?
I think I'm really, yeah, I know. You can look at me like I have 6 heads right now. You know, don't get me wrong. I like the rematch because these two will put on a great show. I did say to you beforehand that I thought Ben Henderson was going to win the fight. I just think it's a weird matchup for Frankie Edgar. It's one of these guys who's just bigger, stronger, maybe not as quick, but he's pretty close. His flexibility is unbelievable. No one's going to submit this guy. His cardio is through the roof. And pretty much, you know, yes, he got taken down by Frankie a couple times. I scored that fight for Ben Henderson. I really didn't see where Frankie won. I don't know where anyone even thought that it was even – I mean, it was close, but not that close.
Yeah.
This is the problem the UFC does, especially when it comes to the lightweight and the welterweight division. They go through a rotation of 2 to 4 guys that are consistently fighting for the belt. Don't get me wrong, there is certain tiers of each division, but there comes a point where the fans are starting to get a little bored. Right. And, you know, Frankie Edgar, his last 3 fights were against the same person before Ben Henderson. You know, he had BJ, then he had Gray Maynard. Right. You know, or only 2 fights, whatever it was. Point of the matter is that in the last 3 years, he's only fought 3 people.
Right.
You know, my personal opinion, I think Anthony Pettis should have been the fight. No question in my mind. I think Frankie Edgar, you know, could have done what everyone else does. You know, in my opinion, I don't think it was close to the point where it could have gone either way. You know, I thought Ben Henderson obviously did a ton of damage. Edgar, I mean, he didn't have a mark on him, and Edgar looked like he was beaten up for 30 rounds.
Right.
You know, one thing that Frankie mentioned was he thought his takedowns were enough to score. Well, yes, he did get takedowns, but I disagree. Takedowns should only really count when you take the guy down. You're able to hold him down and actually do damage. Right. Taking Ben Henderson down and him being able to get back up instantly, to me, is just almost like a stall.
Yeah,
it's it
negates. I agree with that completely. And you see a lot of fighters kind of, and I think Frankie to an extent was doing that. To his credit, tactically, you're trying to get a takedown maybe near the end of the round or a critical point in the round. And I think a lot of the time when the guy in his position doesn't get the decision, he's like, hey, I got the takedowns, but, you know, it's kind of like, well, what did you do with it? Did you control the guy? Did you threaten submissions? Did you ground and pound? And he wasn't really able to do anything. So I think that definitely negates that argument. But one argument for the rematch I do like in terms of a very crowded lightweight division is, I mean, we've got this packed 155-pound class, 1 million guys. It'd almost be hard to make a match of any of the top 6 to 8 guys that wasn't an exciting fight. But you also have 145 pounds where a lot of people talked about Edgar going eventually. And I kind of like it because it sort of expedites that, you know. I kind of don't want Frankie Edgar to sort of be in limbo, you know. So this kind of figures it out. I mean, I think Henderson, you know, God bless him, I think he beats him again. He's only going to be bigger and better. And I just think that this is the UFC's reasoning. Instead of having Frankie sit around and maybe his marketability can be diminished, maybe a loss to another top 10 contender, move him down after this is clearly, you know, it's clearly demonstrated that he can't beat Henderson, and then they send him down against Jose Aldo. I mean, which is a super fight, because I think the problem is Aldo kind of has a thin cupboard. I mean, after he destroyed Chad Mendes, you know, the number 1 contender, there's not a lot else there for him. But speaking of which, of other good matchups, another one we want to talk about is Clay Guida against Gray Maynard. What are your thoughts on this fight, and how relevant is it for the winner in terms of getting a title shot?
Well, I don't think either one, even if they win, gets a title shot. I think it just gets him back in the top 5. You know, you got Guida, who is coming off of a loss. You have Gray Maynard, who's obviously coming off of a loss. And I think you have 2 guys who have been there for a while who will always be in the top 5 until they start really, you know, going downhill. You know, I think the importance of this fight is for them to stay relevant. You know, I'm not going to say just because Gray lost, he falls off, but there are a lot of guys behind him now that are giving more of a challenge in this division than before. You know, you got Barbosa, who's, you know, starting to really creep up in the division. He's fighting Evan Dunham. I love that fight. I still think Barbosa, you know, if he wins that, really should get a nice little push. Obviously, you got Anthony Pettis, you got Jim Miller, Nate Diaz, you know, even Cowboy Cerrone and Jeremy Stevens are back there waiting for a little bit. So you have a lot of guys in this division who are all just, you know, they're right there. That's really it. They're all right there. This fight is mainly to just not go have 2 losses in a row, as obvious and, you know, corny as that sounds. Do I really think that maybe if one of them gets knocked out, it puts him 2 fights away?
Yeah.
But I would be annoyed as a fan that if either one of them win, they get a title shot. Or at least, my opinion, if Gray Maynard beats Guida and you're making Pettis wait, have Gray Maynard fight Anthony Pettis.
Yeah. No, and that's the luxury of having the depth of that division. Whereas I think at bantamweight, we're kind of at the tail end of our Uriah Faber Dominic Cruz thing. After this third fight, especially if it's very similar to their second fight, where Cruz is just a little bit better in every phase, and it's apparent that Faber can't get over that hump. They've got some, they're going to have to start building up some other people. It's almost any live body, but at 155, you really can't afford to do that. We want to look ahead forward to in terms of matchmaking. There's almost been kind of a saturation of MMA. We've got it on FX, we've got it on Fuel. We got at least one pay-per-view every month. Pay-per-view numbers have flatlined somewhat. We haven't had the maybe the big numbers that the UFC wanted for. But there's a card coming up that we're both pretty excited about. UFC 146, I believe it's in May, and it is 5 heavyweight bouts. Is this the
Clash of the Titans, huh?
Right, Clash of the Titans. You got Junior Dos Santos and Overeem, obvious no-brainer for the be-all, end-all heavyweight championship of the world. Former champ Cain Velasquez coming back against Frank Mir, and you got 3 other matches on there. Antonio Silva against Roy Nelson, Mark Hunt against Stefan Struve, which is a total freak show. I think everyone would want to see that fight. And Gabriel Gonzaga against Shane Del Rosario. How important are these all heavyweight cards? Is this a concerted effort by the UFC to kind of, get some red meat to the fans, so to speak, and some heavyweight action?
Yeah, I think that they are taking some time right now to try and reintroduce this division to all the hardcore fans and to the non-hardcore fans, the casual fan who they're trying to get with Fox and all the free shows. There are some really good matchups here, some that I'm not the biggest fan of. The Mark Hunt, Stefan Struve, I don't really get it. I don't think Struve should be given. No, in all fairness, it is a freak show of a fight, but you know what? Mark Hunt's actually been pretty impressive in his last couple of fights. Czech Congo is no pushover, and I really think that Hunt should have been pushed maybe into the Bigfoot Silva fight instead of Roy Nelson.
Yeah.
I would have preferred that fight. I actually would have preferred Bigfoot to fight Shane Carwin, except I don't really know where Carwin is in his health-wise.
Right.
But it's not a bad fight. Matchup-wise, you're going to see 2 strikers. I think Mark Hunt, if he can keep the fight standing, will win. I think he's proven to everyone that his takedown defense has evolved tremendously.
Yes, it has.
Congo's a big, strong heavyweight. Couldn't take him down, and Hunt still has the hand. So in regards to that fight, I think it's pretty cool. One fight that I think is very intriguing is the Gabriel Gonzaga versus Shane Del Rosario. You're now seeing another Strikeforce import come over, and Del Rosario is not one of the bigger heavyweights, but he's one of the more well-rounded ones. I think that's another intriguing matchup, and that's really going to either say, hey, Gabriel, are you back for real? Or Shane, can you really hack it in the heavyweight division against a guy who used to be a title contender?
No, and that's, I would think of all the guys, Gabriel Gonzaga reminds me of Kevin Randleman in that he was an oddsmaker's nightmare. One night the guy could be a world beater, and the next performance just looks totally flat. All the talent in the world, but very erratic in terms of consistency, and that's a great opportunity for Del Rosario, especially on the main portion of the card. And also coming up next month, we have UFC 145, and a fight I think might be a little bit overlooked with all the stuff going on. John Jones against Rashad Evans. It's finally going to happen after a year plus of banter back and forth. Seems like every time John Jones wins in his great run in 2011, there was Rashad in the cage to ruin his special moment, as John Jones said. Do you expect as competitive a fight as Rashad hopes it'll be, or is this going to be another one-sided Jones clinic on all things John Jones?
It's so hard to really, I'm not there training with these guys when these guys were apparently big and little brother. Right. The only thing I could say is I personally think that Rashad Evans will bring one of the hardest challenges to John Jones. Because he did train with him, he knows everything about him, and Rashad's no slouch. Rashad's got very good hands. Rashad's pretty big for a 205er himself, and he's no slouch in the wrestling department. Do I think John Jones is going to be able to toss him around like he did every other guy he's fought? I really don't think so. I think this is going to be a lot closer than people think. I don't think John Jones is going to run through Rashad. If he does, I'll eat my words. I'll be more than happy to. But if you really look at the last few people that he's fought, Rampage Jackson, he's kind of on the decline of his career. Okay. His stand-up's not as crisp. He's not as fast. His wrestling takedown defense is clearly not as good. I mean, you saw that in the fight against Bader. So clearly John Jones had an advantage in every way, shape, or form in that fight. His fight against Machida, although Machida might have won that first round, it's still, John Jones is just much more athletic than Machida. Machida's karate stuff clearly has not been as effective as when he first came to the UFC.
Right, it's kind of been figured out a little bit.
And then even Shogun. Shogun is just not the same Shogun. Granted, he smashed Forrest Griffin. What does that mean? It means you beat a guy who seems like he's not interested in the sport anymore.
Right.
So I think you have a guy in Rashad who might have even felt a little insulted that he was fighting Phil Davis in the main event. Sure. I don't think he felt that Phil deserved to be in that same, category as Rashad. And you know what? Rashad might not finish that fight, but I learned a lot of things from that. A, his stand-up has become pretty damn good. All right, his cardio's up there. And you know what? I'm looking forward to this fight. I hope it's a close one, because you don't like to see Jones just run through every single person, although he's a fun guy to watch. Right. I just think it's going to be a lot closer than everyone thinks. I don't think this is going to be a John Jones demolition party.
Really? See, I look at it, and I have a completely opposite point of view. I look at, Rashad, to his credit, Rashad reminds me of an overachiever. I mean, he's a guy that, he was like 48 and 34 as a college wrestler, as a 174-pounder. Doesn't really have the high-end wrestling pedigree. Still performs really well. He's a great game planner. He doesn't make mistakes. I mean, that fight that Evans had with Rampage was completely won on his game plan. Rampage has become kind of a one-dimensional headhunter. But I look at the relative performances against Machida, who completely had Evans confused, flummoxed. Jones took one round, figured him out, and destroyed him, submitted him standing up. Completely dominated Rampage, even though Rampage, kind of been a little bit of a, performance-wise decline. And decimated Shogun, who I think probably would have beaten Evans. I just don't really see what Evans brings to this dance that Jones hasn't already proven that he's, completely negate. I mean, I think his reach, his size, a lot of things. But there were some shreds, I think, in that first round against Machida. Maybe the movement, mixing it up. He was able to nail Jones a few times. And I think that Rashad, he's got to have that confidence going. I think he's got to go in and be competitive in that first round. And
sure.
And one reason I do hope it's competitive is because I don't want to see the talk for John Jones to move up to heavyweight just yet. Because
that's way too soon. There's plenty of other guys he could fight before that.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. No, your points are extremely valid, and it's pretty much what everyone is going to say. I agree with you. Rashad might not be better than him in any aspect of the game, but when it comes to the mental situation in this, there's more on the line. John Jones might not be extremely confident. He might be a little timid because he's got a lot more to lose in this than Rashad does. Right. Jones is considered the next big thing. He's considered the next GSP, the next Anderson Silva, the next best fighter ever to walk the face of planet Earth. That's a lot to carry on. How old is he? 23?
Yeah.
It's a lot to carry. And with all the smack talk between the two, if Rashad loses, what happens? He moves back into the bottom part of the top 5.
Yeah.
If John Jones loses, he lost to someone who everyone thought he shouldn't have lost to. When you're such a heavy favorite at such a young age, granted the experience factor might not mean anything anymore, there might be that fear factor of, man, I can't make it. What if I lose to Rashad?
Right.
How bad will that look? Right. And I'm kind of thinking that's, John Jones says he's focused, he's mentally strong. I don't disbelieve him. I just think when it comes to this fight, there's going to be more emotion involved. And sometimes that could be a good thing. But if you let your emotions go and you get out of who you are, anything could happen.
Yeah, and that's really the thing is I always remember the after George St. Pierre lost to Matt Serra in that stunner in 2007, and there's they have a camera on in the locker room after he's been knocked out, and he's just, oh my God, what happened? He's completely, it's sort of dawned on him to everything that he's lost, in this fight.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure, a lot of distractions, a lot of demands in your time, whereas Rashad Evans, he's not the champ. He's just going there to fight a guy that he's always been confident he can beat. And I think this fight will really tip the scales, because if Jones is really dominant in this fight and it's one-sided, I think he will start to carry that Mike Tyson factor into fights, because he'll have basically dominated everybody at the top of the division.
Yeah, everyone will be scared. I mean, not gonna be scared to fight him,
right.
But it's not gonna be a fun thing. And tell you the truth, after Rashad, I don't really know who they have lined up in the wings. Who they're really bringing up to be that next contender. I mean, would it be Dan Henderson? I'm assuming yes.
Yeah,
but after that, the UFC has a lot of work doing that 205 division. It is not as strong as they're hoping. Rampage, Shogun, I don't, I don't really think that holds as much water as it did a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I really hope they got Dan Anderson waiting, because after, like I said, after this fight, whoever wins, regardless of who it is, it's going to be tough.
Need somebody to step in, and we might have to go to the old man, Henderson, all 40, 41 years old of him in that big right hand.
I hope so. I hope so. He's fun to watch.
No, definitely. Well, listen, folks, we just wanted to thank you again for joining us here on MMA Talking Heads. Ian, how can fans get hold of you?
You guys can reach me on Twitter at ParkerKHero. And other than that, email us your questions, shoot us on Twitter, whatever you want. We'd love to touch up on any topic you guys want us to talk about.
Thanks so much for joining us again, guys. Once again, you can find us at MMATalkingHeads.com, Twitter.com/MMA Talking Heads, and we look forward to you on the next edition of our show. Thanks so much.